Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël.
Ladies and gentlemen, Senator Mitch McConnell. Okay. It's a great time for our Commonwealth. Barack Obama, we are roaring out. With President Trump and Governor Bevin and our united Republican leadership, Kentucky is leading the way. We've hit and sustained the lowest unemployment rate in Kentucky's recorded history, and there are 4 more open jobs than people looking for those jobs. The top congressional leaders, I'm the only one, not from New York or California. I'm the guy that sticks up for Middle America and for Kentucky. I saved the Supreme Court for a generation by blocking President Obama's nominees and led the way for the abortion and Brett Kavanaugh. Now, Washington liberals responded by targeting me. They handpicked Amy McGowan. McGrath. She sends her regrets. She's still working up an answer on Brett Kavanaugh with her friends at MSNBC. I want to thank Amy for her bravery. Running for office in Kentucky, it takes a lot of guts to hold your first campaign event in Virginia with the co-author of the bill allowing, now listen to this, post-birth abortion. Look, in Washington, President Trump and I are making America great again. Confirming young and brilliant judges, investing in our great military, especially the men and women at Fort Campbell, Fort Knox, middle-class tax cuts, regulatory rollbacks. Jamie Comer and I led the charge to legalize industrial hemp. Now it's growing in 101 of our 120 counties. We're also leading the way in the war on carp to protect our West Kentucky lakes. With Republican leadership, Kentucky is rising to the top. But listen to this, if you watch for 1 minute of the presidential debate on the Democratic side, you see what they have in mind for our country. They want open borders and abolish ICE. We want to build a wall. They want the job-killing Green New Deal. We know coal keeps the lights on. They want to take away your employer-based health insurance and force everyone into one big government plan. We want to keep what works and fix what doesn't. They want to turn America into a socialist country. Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell are never going to let that happen. That's why I call myself the Grim Reaper. I'm killing their socialist agenda. But the first step in fighting these liberal schemes happens right here in Kentucky this year. We need to re-elect Governor Bevin so he can continue his record-setting gains for Kentucky workers. $20 billion in announced new investment in our state under this governor. 55,000 announced new jobs under this governor. We need to send our entire Republican team of all-stars to Frankfurt. The first Republican Attorney General since the 1940s, Daniel Cameron. Mike Adams will officially oversee our elections, and unlike Kentucky's current Secretary of State, he won't disgrace the office. Brian Quarles, the best agriculture commissioner in America. And Allison Ball and Mike Harmon putting your family above the politics of yesterday. So look, there's also the other side of the stage. I'm going to spend about as much time talking about them as Kentuckians will voting for them this November. None.
It is Monday, the 5th of August of 2019, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam, and our daily special is River City Hash Mondays. It's sadly been one of those weekends, folks. You don't need me to remind you the fact that this nation is awash in guns, and just anybody can get them. Anybody. And if you just even want to know why the silence from the usual white right-wing gun nuts, they can't even express thoughts and prayers for the victims in El Paso. And I know Dayton is in there too, but we're, right now I'm still in a big rigmarole with some more of what I would call the usual actors here in Southern Oregon, giving gross misinformation. I mean, it is just ass backwards gross. But we'll get into that in just a moment. There is some question about what to call these shooters. Crazy? Oh yeah, it's mental illness. Well, let's not forget that one of Trump's first acts when he became installed in the Oval Office, with the help of a hostile foreign power. Let's not forget. One of his first acts was to sign a bill revoking Obama-era gun checks for mental illness. So he has no credibility on the mental health issue, but it doesn't matter. It does not matter. Do not fight these people with facts. They don't care about facts. They make up their facts. The fact remains is that there are methods to codify gun deaths in the United States. Even though right-wing gun nuts say, no, you can't have, we're going to prevent laws that allow that. In fact, we're going to make laws that prevent you from finding that out. And then at the same time call the left fascists for suppressing free speech. Letting people know about gun deaths is suppressing free speech. Everything is ass backwards with these people. Up is down, down is up, right is right, and left is always left. Yeah. Well, they hate being called names. They seem to love the guy that has titled everybody with pro wrestling monikers. As soon as you give them a pro wrestling moniker from your point of view, you're the angry left. You're full of hate. So I proposed a very simple equation, one that we would ask folks back in the day. And Randy Rhoads has reminded people of this equation. Are you racist or are you anti-racist? But remember, there is no such thing as not being racist. Trump says, I'm the least racist person in the world. Well, that is true. Could be true. He's still a racist. Might be the least in his mind. He didn't say he was anti-racist. But there's a lot of people, as soon as you mention racism, they say, I'm not racist. Well, calling brown people illegals, for instance. You're either racist or you're anti-racist. Remember, there is no such thing as not being racist. The asking of that simple question, that equation, is construed as angry and hate-filled. The left is always so angry. Now, when I brought forth this observation that there was a strange silence from the usual right wing, I mean, there were no condolences. There were no thoughts and prayers. I was attacked personally saying, you get no condolences. And I'm thinking, it's not for me. It's not for me. It's for those people in El Paso. I mean, where's the thoughts and prayers? We make fun of the thoughts and prayers all the time, but you don't even want to give the thoughts and the prayers. There was an argument every which way, up and down, this side of Sally to that side of Jane, about what this shooter was. Now, on these Southern Oregon community Facebook pages that I am been a part of, one in particular, not the one where I had issues with before here in town, but more in the county. Regardless, just outright lies, posting pictures of the supposed shooter saying he's not white, he's Mexican, and he's gay. And they had just, I feel sorry for whatever picture they posted of the person they purported to be the shooter, and it wasn't the shooter. So, I don't know. I think if you see that stuff, you got to say something about it. And it's going to piss people off. It's, they're going to act like bots. So, in this instance, I didn't even talk about anything other than the fact that there was a strange silence by the gun nuts about not even thoughts and prayers for the victims. And no, the first responses are not. No, you're wrong. We actually feel sorry for them. No, the first response is, why do you want to take my guns? I said, I didn't say anything about taking your guns. You're trying to take our guns. So every argument was that you're angry, we, the left, angry and hateful that we want to take their guns. And I'm like, no. I think, sensible gun control, like the Obama-era gun checks so that people with mental illness couldn't get guns. The only reason Trump did that is that the black guy did it. Everything the black guy did has to be undone. If the black guy was a good guy, Trump has to be a bad guy. If the black guy was a good husband, Trump has to be a bad husband. It comes easy for him. I mean, let's be clear. And but bring up any of these facts, and you're the one that's been trafficking in fake news. But just outright, it's weird links. They are actually doing the QAnon conspiracy theory BS that the FBI says is a national security threat. Bring that up, and of course the FBI is some sort of dark, deep government conspiracy. And you know where it's going to go. They're going to start talking about the Templars, and, before they even get to the Rothschilds, I've kind of tuned out on that argument and say to them, sorry, but I've heard this all before. And of course now, when people realize how old I am, I'm too old to learn new things. And I have to tell them, kids, this is not new. You're just hearing it for the first time. So I feel that in some way, rather than, actually teaching, confrontation about what is bullshit, is important. And then slightly nudging people towards, some other points of view, like reality, that apparently some have not ever experienced. Why else would you carry an assault rifle into Walmart and no one say anything because, well, that's normal? Because they live in fear. They hate the fact that whatever it is that makes them secure, I don't know, wide open spaces? I don't know what it is. The historical divide between the town and the country, the meadow, the pasture. There is a whole history, a whole study on that divide. I used to think that was basic American history. All of this has been settled. We got to start over with, is the world really round or is it flat? The know-nothings have power. They have loud mouths, they have guns, and they get to determine what is proper etiquette and what is not. Well, what's on the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast? Oh, I have just been going on forever. Oh, my gosh. Well, of course, that was Mitch McConnell at the top. Oh, God. That almost sounded like an old Beatles album, I think it was In a Day in the Life where it ends with, block that kick, block that kick. Or was it Paul is dead, miss him, miss him? No, so Moscow Mitch chanted throughout his whole presentation there. He went up on stage at the Fancy Farm Picnic in rural Graves County, Kentucky. That's a yearly event that they put on there. Sort of a roast of sorts, except he didn't expect to be roasted himself. No one roasts Mitch at these events, by the way. But he wanted to go up there and mock Obama and mock about all the things that he did to put the black guy in his place. And throughout, a large segment of the crowd, actually a little more than half, chanted Moscow Mitch, just so he wouldn't get away with it. That's what we have to do. Confrontation whenever they give you the bullshit. On the rest of the menu, Brett Kavanaugh wants to make it even easier for shooters of mass destruction to obtain assault rifles because, why just relegate it to, anybody? How about everybody now? Republican-led voter purges erased at least 17 million voters in the last 2 years. Of course, it makes Vlad's work easier this time. And more Afghan civilians have been killed by US and Afghan forces than by the Taliban this year. And that's just this year. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where Mexico is considering drawing up extradition papers on terrorism charges over the shooting of Mexicans in El Paso, Texas. And there is some precedent for this. The U.S. does it all the time. And Russia's anti-Putin opposition groups announced a nationwide protest this coming weekend, despite over 1,000 arrests. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, you will notice right there where the social media scroll is our chat room link. And thank you, Kelly, for monitoring that platform. To the leftish of the page from the chat room link at the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. You will then notice our link to our Patreon site, and please do become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio. You know, Netroots Radio has been broadcasting 24/7, 365 for the last 8 years and counting. And we have been unable to do this without your generosity. And we appreciate that generosity very much, because we are Resistance Radio, and we are tasked with resisting, as the founders originally intended, all those many, decades and decades and decades ago. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, it's very simple. Just go to @Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that, and thank you, Tom. I, of course, take care of @Justice Putnam, and I also, very importantly now, post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's, and that's where you can get the show notes and links, because that's an integral part to this multimedia operation. If you would like to follow the show on Twitter, go to @Cookbook West, and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever fine podcasts can be found, mixed in with all the rest of us. Okay. Well, we better get on with this first offering that we have here in the Bistro Cafe at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Oh my, we're just burning up the time. This first offering is by Ian Millhiser out of Think Progress. It looks like Kavanaugh wants to make it even easier for, gunmen to obtain assault rifles. And unfortunately, he's probably got the votes to do it. Well, unfortunately, for our reasonable side of the political spectrum. Well, of course, on Saturday, we all know that a man in El Paso, Texas, walked into a Walmart and murdered over 20 people. He used an AK-47, a kind of assault rifle. And I know a lot of people will say, that's not an assault rifle. That's not the right word for it. I don't care. Military grade. Less than a day later, another man in Dayton, Ohio, murdered 9 people in a bar. But hey, he's a Satanist, and Satanists always cancel out all of the white supremacist killings. Every single one. It's right there in the white Bill of Rights. I'm telling you, it's there. Well, that shooting lasted less than a minute, but the gunman reportedly was able to rapidly attack his victims, in part because he used a high-capacity weapon. I've seen what was purported to be his ammo attachment. A weird setup of 2 drums on either side linked up. It was looked like hundreds of rounds in it. Like a Gatling gun, but with 2 drums. Crazy. Meanwhile, if Trump's most recent appointment to the Supreme Court gets his way, both assault rifles and high-capacity magazines, they're not magazines. I hear that one a lot, too. Will soon enjoy special constitutional protection. It is likely, moreover, that Brett Kavanaugh has the 5 votes he needs to make this happen. In 2008, not long after the Supreme Court struck down its much stronger gun regulations, the District of Columbia passed an emergency law that, among other things, banned assault rifles and high-capacity magazines within the district. The law was challenged, and the challenge eventually reached a panel of 3 Republican appointees on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. 2 of those judges upheld the law. The 3rd judge was, that's right, Brett Kavanaugh. Get me a beer. In his dissent, Kavanaugh called for a sweeping expansion of the Second Amendment, beyond even what his 2 Republican colleagues were willing to endorse. Regarding assault rifles, the future Trump appointee argued that these weapons should enjoy the same nearly unassailable level of constitutional protection the Supreme Court afforded to handguns in its 2008 decision of D.C. versus Heller. That's right. Now, in Heller, Kavanaugh wrote, the Supreme Court held that handguns, the vast majority of which today are semi-automatic, are constitutionally protected because they have not traditionally been banned and are in common use by law-abiding citizens. Well, so are defective garage door openers, but they take those off the market. He claimed that there is no meaningful or persuasive constitutional distinction between semi-automatic handguns and semi-automatic rifles. Of course not, because if you use them for hunting, you're not going to have any meat for dinner that night, or I don't know however long it takes you to process the thing. That's the language they use out in the field. We have to process this. Well, the D.C. court case, which involved many of the same parties as the Supreme Court's 2008 decision, was called Heller v. D.C. Well, the D.C. district judges that disagreed with Kavanaugh rested much of their opinion on the Supreme Court's 2000 statement that dangerous and unusual weapons are beyond the reach of the Second Amendment. That's right. And Kavanaugh's arguing, they're not unusual. They're not exceedingly dangerous. Come on, everybody uses them. Law-abiding citizens, by their very nature, are not dangerous or rare. Now, when Heller was decided, and this is months before Justice John Paul Stevens retired, Kennedy was the swing vote. Always the swing vote. And it's interesting that because of the Heller decision, and even before, the Supreme Court was highly unlikely to bring gun cases before their court because of Kennedy. They just didn't know where he was going to rule. And they didn't want to risk it because, it used to be that once the Supreme Court made a decision, that was the law. It's a little bit different now. All you have to do is just ignore it. Come and get me. So, and I'm talking about the guy in the Oval Office. Okay. But that trickles down. That's the trickle-down theory. So, because of that, these court cases would not get on the docket, would not be put on the calendar. And it's unusual that not very long after Kavanaugh has been appointed and placed on the court, that these cases are now being put on the docket. And he may have the votes to get them, but it's worth noting that these cases may be moot. After the court announced it would hear the most recent Second Amendment case, New York City changed the gun regulation at issue in a likely effort to prevent the Supreme Court from reaching a decision. But there's virtually no doubt that Kavanaugh is eager to expand the Second Amendment. That any high-capacity, rapid-fire weapon, essentially anything, is in the purview of the Second Amendment. So I would like to beg the question, if they are able to have their high-capacity, rapid-fire, military-grade weapons as a Second Amendment right, then I would like to have a neutron bomb. Right now, it doesn't destroy property. Look, it doesn't. It kills people. And that should be my right to life, liberty, and the protection of about 1,000-year half-life nuclear contaminated property. Oliver Willis of Share Blue Media brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. A new analysis of voter data found that between 2016 and 2018, millions of people were purged from voter rolls, overwhelmingly in areas of the country under Republican-led state governments. At least 17 million voters were purged nationwide between 2016 and 2018, the Brennan Center said. The analysis found that counties with a history of voter discrimination have continued purging people from the rolls at much higher rates than in other counties. The biggest source of those purges were states like Texas, Oklahoma, Georgia, Tennessee, South Carolina, Idaho, and Indiana, where the governments are led by Republican elected officials. Minority voters are more likely to share names than white voters, potentially exposing them to a greater risk of being purged, the center noted. Voters often do not realize they've been purged until they try to cast a ballot on election day, and it's already too late. And I don't know, maybe they're going to make a law that says if you've been purged and you try to vote, you have committed a felony, 7 years for you. It's coming. They don't want people to vote because they can't win if people vote. Ali Latifi of Think Progress brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Last week, the UN released its second report this year on civilian casualties in the ongoing war in Afghanistan. Though the report found that armed opposition groups like the Taliban and ISIS were responsible overall for the highest number of civilian casualties, including deaths and injuries, the Afghan government and its allies, meaning us, were nevertheless responsible for the majority of civilian deaths between the 1st of January and June 30th. That figure should raise the most alarm in Washington, and especially at the CIA. The report's conclusion that 83% of the 519 civilian casualties caused by aerial operations, oh, you mean drones, were caused by international military forces. That would be us. We need to get out of there. We need to do it responsibly, because if you just read the preamble to Moby Dick by Melville, it'll tell you everything you need to know what will happen. All right, let's get to our break, and when we come back from that break, we are going to go through weather from around the world and finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, the new rule of Fight Club. 2 decades after that film comes a strange dark comedy that begins like The Karate Kid, takes a turn through the aforementioned, and ends up in pretty much straight-up horror. Our protagonist is Casey, a single, introverted, dachshund-owning accountant who's assaulted by a masked motorcycle gang one night while returning home from buying dog food. After shopping for a pistol in a wonderfully sardonic scene in a gun shop, he decides instead to enroll in a local dojo for karate lessons. It's at this point that we meet the teacher, the sensei, who takes him under his wing, coolly intertwining instruction with pseudo-Eastern platitudes tailored to Casey's desire to, as he puts it, become what he had feared. If deadpan can be brought off with intensity, Jesse Eisenberg's Casey does it. The character, though in his 30s, seems unsocialized and vulnerable, primed, as it turns out, to soak up the poison philosophy of Sensei, turning Casey from shy and retiring to taciturn and dangerous. Sensei is played by the often overlooked Alessandro Nivola from American Hustle and Face Off. He's responsible for most of the unpeeling of the onion as the film gets darker and darker. Pivotal to both plot and commentary in this one is British actress Imogen Poots as the only female in the dojo. She's second only to Sensei skill-wise, but is otherwise disrespected. The movie isn't set in any particular time or place, and cues from the set are either careless or intentionally confusing. Also, you'll note the deliberate delivery of the dialogue, which is reminiscent of a surreal stage play. The Art of Self-Defense combines suspense and humor and earns at least a brown belt for its send-up of pervasive toxic masculinity. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our page on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Christopher Intagliata. If you're a germaphobe navigating the city, there are certain mandatory rules of engagement. Use a paper towel to shield your hand as you touch the bathroom door handle. Lift toilet seat covers with your shoe. Touch buttons at ATMs and crosswalks and elevators with a knuckle or the back of your hand, never a fingertip. I know this because I am that person. And a new study in the journal Scientific Reports somewhat justifies my behavior, because when researchers in London sampled all those kinds of surfaces in public shopping centers and train stations and common areas in hospitals, what they found was a whole lot of antibiotic-resistant bacteria lurking there. The scientists swabbed sites all over London and ended up with 600 samples of Staphylococcus bacteria. Of those, nearly half were resistant to 2 or more commonly used antibiotics, like penicillin and erythromycin. And the hospital samples had significantly more drug-resistant microbes, which makes sense because hospitals are a place where they use a lot of antibiotics. But if there is a silver lining here, it might be how few staph bacteria were multi-drug resistant in public places, a mere 47%. Because a few years back, one of the same scientists swabbed London hotel rooms and found that 86% of the staph bacteria there were multi-drug resistant, which may not help you sleep easy. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Christopher Intagliata.
This is a message from CDC.
After hurricanes, tornadoes, and floods, standing water and excess moisture help mold grow in your home, garage, and other structures. When you return to a home that has been flooded, know that you're likely to have mold. Mold puts your family's health at risk. If you have mold growing in your home, you should clean it up and fix other water problems, such as leaks in roofs, walls, or plumbing. Keep your children and pets out of affected areas until you've cleaned. Control moisture in your home to prevent mold growth. To remove mold growth from hard surfaces, use commercial products, soap and water, or a bleach solution of no more than 1 cup of household laundry bleach in 1 gallon of water. Follow the manufacturer's instructions. Never mix bleach with ammonia or other household cleaners. It will produce dangerous, toxic fumes. Open windows and doors to provide fresh air.
For more information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Welcome to A Cup of Health with CDC, a weekly feature of the MMWR, the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. I'm your host, Dr. Kathleen Dooling. Occasional aches and pains are an expected part of life, but for many people, pain is a constant companion. Dr. Chad Helmick is with CDC's National Center for Chronic Disease Prevention and Health Promotion. He's joining us today to discuss ways to manage chronic pain. Welcome to the show, Chad.
Thank you.
Chad, how many people in the U.S. suffer from chronic pain?
In 2016, 50 million adults had chronic pain, which is pain on most or every day in the past 6 months. More interesting, though, is that 20 million people have high-impact chronic pain, which is chronic pain that also limits their work or life activities on most or every day in the past 6 months. This is a problem because chronic pain is associated not only with symptoms, but with anxiety and depression, reduced quality of life, and the risk of opioid problems.
What are the most common causes of chronic pain?
The most common causes generally relate to bones and joints, like low back pain and arthritis, but there are many other causes: headaches, sickle cell disease, fibromyalgia, surgery and injuries, and many, many others.
Is chronic pain more common in any particular group of people?
Yes, it occurs at all ages, but it's more common in older middle-aged adults and in the oldest old, 85 and older. It's also more common in women, poor people, and those who live in rural areas.
How is chronic pain treated?
Well, the first thing to do is to get a diagnosis, which can help guide treatment. But the thinking about chronic pain now is that it becomes a chronic disease by itself, regardless of the cause, and that can cause significant problems. The real goal in management is to have a manageable level of pain, not to get rid of all pain. There's several steps that can be taken, and these are sometimes difficult to do because of barriers to access. But it makes sense to do the simplest and safest things first. And these are non-drug steps. Things like physical activity. Walking is perfectly good to help reduce pain. Also, self-management education can give you some confidence in managing chronic pain when you're on your own. There's also physical therapy, occupational therapy, psychological therapy, better sleep, which usually means less alcohol, and seeing a chiropractor or getting biofeedback and massage. If that's not enough, non-opioid drugs like Tylenol or Motrin and Advil or naproxen or Aleve can help. If those don't work, then it's time to consider something stronger. Sometimes that's opioids, but there's not great evidence that opioids are good for long-term pain in most people.
Do you have any advice for people suffering from chronic pain?
Well, it's important to work with a variety of providers who are working together to help you. The goal, again, is manageable pain so you can live a productive life. This can include physical therapy, most people can walk, to treat any underlying depression or anxiety, and to avoid further injuries. Finally, the National Pain Strategy is laying out a strategic roadmap to improve pain management system in this country.
Where can listeners get more information about managing chronic pain?
Listeners can go to the NIH website, nih.gov, and type in National Pain Strategy.
Thanks, Chad. I've been talking today with Dr. Chad Helmick about ways to manage chronic pain. If you're experiencing daily pain, talk with your healthcare provider to ensure you have the correct diagnosis and know how to manage your condition. Until next time, be well. This is Dr. Kathleen Dooling for A Cup of Health with CDC.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO. This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Welcome to A Cup of Health with CDC, a weekly feature of the MMWR, the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. I'm Dr. Jeffrey Nemhauser, filling in for your host, Dr. Kathleen Dooling. As the U.S. population ages, more people are at risk for injuries. The largest percentage of injury-related deaths among this group are caused by falls. Elizabeth Burns is with CDC's National Center for Injury Prevention and Control. She's joining us today to discuss ways to prevent injuries and deaths from falls among senior adults. Welcome to the show, Elizabeth.
Thanks for having me.
Elizabeth, what are some of the more common consequences when a senior adult falls?
Well, first, it's important to note that falls are incredibly common. More than 1 in 4 older adults will fall in a given year. Common consequences include loss of independence and an increased fear of falling, as older adults are afraid to do the same kinds of activities they were doing before. And this can actually lead to more falls, as older adults have less strength in their lower body. Common consequences include hip fracture and traumatic brain injury. And ultimately, in 2016, almost 30,000 older adults died because of a fall.
So are falls more common in men or in women?
Falls are more common in women, and more women go to the emergency department because of a fall, and more women die because of a fall. However, the rate of fall deaths are more common in men than women. What this means is that out of 100,000 men, more will die from a fall than out of 100,000 women.
What are common causes of falls among older people?
Getting on and off the toilet and getting in and out of bed are common causes of falls. Walking around the hallways at night when the lights are off is a common way people fall. There's also an increased amount of medications used in seniors, which have side effects like making them lightheaded, and that increases the risk of falls and is a common cause.
With all of those factors, what are some ways our listeners can decrease their chances of falling?
Older adults should talk to their healthcare provider or doctor about how they can decrease their chances of falling. This can be done during the annual wellness visit or during annual physicals. The doctor will recommend an exercise program that should increase strength and balance or maybe refer you to a physical therapist. Additionally, they can look through your medications and perhaps reduce your doses or suggest medications that decrease your chances of falls.
Are there things we can do to modify our homes to prevent falling?
Oh, absolutely. Installing grab bars on the side of the toilet, making sure that rugs are taped down or removed, making sure that there's lighting in the hallways are all really simple ways that an older adult can modify their home to prevent falls.
Where can listeners go to get more information about preventing falls?
Listeners can go to cdc.gov/study, and that's spelled STEADI.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I've been talking today with Elizabeth Burns about ways to prevent fall-related injuries and deaths among senior adults. Improving strength and agility through regular exercise and removing potential obstacles in the home can help decrease the risk for falls. If you or a loved one is older and struggle with mobility, talk with a healthcare provider about ways to decrease the risks for fall-related injuries and death. Until next time, be well. This is Dr. Jeffrey Nemhauser for A Cup of Health with CDC.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
It's now pedal to the metal, full speed ahead on executions by the United States government. I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. It has been over 16 years since a federal prisoner was strapped down to a gurney in a death chamber, but the Department of Justice has just announced that in December it will begin killing federal prisoners again, and indeed has scheduled 5 executions for December and January. In considering the death penalty, it's important to appreciate that you don't get to execute the person who you, perhaps, think should die. Rather, the government has to construct and maintain an entire system, an enormous apparatus of death, which history proves will fail over and over again. Because, as studies show, the death penalty is not a deterrent. It makes mistakes. It executes the innocent. It's racist and expensive and inhumane. And our government killing people with premeditation diminishes us all. Most countries, 170 of the 194 in the United Nations, have abolished the death penalty, either in law or in practice. And 25 of the 50 states have abolished capital punishment or imposed a moratorium. But our federal government now intends to do everything within its power to kill people, to prove that killing people is wrong. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU, because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1981. It was a dark day in U.S. labor history. Nearly 13,000 members of the Professional Air Traffic Controllers Organization had been out on strike for 2 days. At issue were working conditions and hours. More than 6,000 flights were canceled on the first day of the strike alone. President Ronald Reagan held a press conference at the White House's Rose Garden to address the work stoppage. He declared that the strike constituted a peril to national safety. He also announced that strikes by federal workers were illegal. Although this was technically true, federal workers had participated in more than 20 strikes and sickouts in the years leading up to the Patco walkout. Yet President Reagan seized on the opportunity to bust the union. And in what has been called the shot heard round the boardroom, he announced that every Patco worker that did not return to work within 48 hours would be fired. He made good stood on his promise, and more than 11,000 air traffic controllers lost their jobs. The president also decreed that the strikers could never be rehired. By October, the Federal Labor Relations Authority had decertified the union. President Reagan's actions had a chilling impact on the labor movement. Before PATCO, there were 300 major strikes on average in the United States each year. Afterwards, that number dropped to 30. 3 decades after the decision, Joseph McCartin, a professor at Georgetown University, described the impact in a New York Times article, writing, "More than any other labor dispute of the past 3 decades. Reagan's confrontation with the Professional Air Traffic Controllers Organization, or PATCO, undermined the bargaining power of American workers and their labor unions."
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. River City Hash Mondays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River and the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 70 degrees Fahrenheit, slated for a high of the upper 90s to around 100. Winds are currently out of the west-southwest out of the east-southeast. Light and variable will be picking up at about 5 to 10 miles per hour in a few hours. Shifting out of the west-northwest will continue out of that direction throughout the day until tonight, where it will shift out of the north-northwest, continuing its clip at 5 to 10 miles per hour. And we will be under sunny conditions, and hopefully we won't have much in the way of fire smoke because we've had some pretty good air. Grass pollen is moderate. The air quality index currently is good at 32 parts per million, and the daytime UV index is very high at 8. Barometric pressure locally is rising at 29.8 inches. Visibility is up to 10 miles, and relative humidity is, actually down to 62%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. London is 77 and sunny. Paris is 82 and sunny. Rome is 90 degrees and sunny, very sunny, by the way. Kiev is 70 degrees and fair. Kabul is 90 degrees and fair. Hong Kong is 82 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 86 and partly cloudy. Sydney, Australia, in the dead of winter, is 52 degrees and clear. San Francisco, California, in the dead of summer, is 55 degrees and cloudy, with a wind advisory on the bay for small craft and offshore for small craft as well. And New York, is 78 degrees Fahrenheit and fair. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. Diana Beth Solomon of Reuters brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Mexico's Attorney General is considering litigation, alleging that the mass shooting at a Walmart store in El Paso, in which 7 Mexicans were among the 20 people killed, was terrorism, the country's foreign minister said yesterday, Sunday. Such a legal move could lead to a request for the extradition of the gunman, Mexico's government said. U.S. authorities have cited a manifesto they attributed to the suspect as evidence that the massacre was racially motivated. For Mexico, this individual is a terrorist, Foreign Minister Marcelo Ebrard said at a news conference, urging the U.S. to deliver a clear and forceful position against hate crimes. He did not say in which jurisdiction Mexico would file the litigation. El Paso is a heavily Latino city that sits on the U.S.-Mexico border across from Ciudad Juarez, a major gathering point for migrants aiming to cross into the U.S. and others waiting out requests for asylum in the U.S. Ebrard said his ministry would request information from the U.S. on how the shooter acquired the weapon he used and whether U.S. officials were aware of the purchase.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers, c'est tout.
Andrew Osborne and Maxim Rodinoff of Reuters bring us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Saturday's protest, conceived by opposition activists as a peaceful walk to protest against the exclusion of their candidates from a Moscow election next month, was systematically and violently dispersed by police. Groups monitoring the event said Sunday that police had detained over 1,000 people on Saturday, up from its early estimate of just over 800 people. Many, but not all of those detained were later released by police. It is said some of those detained had their phones confiscated and had been denied access to a lawyer. Faced with a wave of summer protests, authorities have opened criminal proceedings for what they term mass civil unrest, an offense punishable with up to 15 years in jail. This is just for the city council of Moscow. Just the city council. Vlad is so afraid of having opposition, even in, really, I got to tell you, a fairly lowly level of government. Although they rejected the protesters' complaints, they being the police and the government, they have said they'll allow protests in Moscow on Saturday and Sunday next weekend, albeit in a location away from the city center, which the opposition has rejected in the past. Protesters would demand that jailed activists be released, that opposition candidates be allowed to run in the Moscow election, and that the mayor of Moscow and other top officials resign. This is a matter of human dignity, about the right to choose and express your opinion, an editorial in one of the local papers said. Activists say the Russian Constitution allows them to freely protest, but authorities say they need to agree to the timing and location in advance, something that was not done ahead of Saturday's protests. The focus of protesters' anger is a prohibition on the number of opposition-minded candidates, some of whom are allies with Alexei Navalny, the now jailed opposition leader. All right, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know that Netroots Radio is going to broadcast on, and we're going to meet up tomorrow for Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goer. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.